The morning of February 22nd, 1943. Near Spitler, Tunisia, the desert air shimmers with heat. 1st Panzerabteilung 501, Tiger Battalion, rolls forward through the scrubland, hunting American armor. Lieutenant Hans Weber peers through his commander's cupola, scanning for targets. His Tiger's 88mm gun can destroy anything the Americans have fielded. He knows this. His crew knows this. Then, he sees it. An M4A1 Sherman, hull down behind a ridge, its turret swiveling frantically. The American crew has spotted the Tiger. Weber knows what comes next. The Americans will fire, the shell will bounce harmlessly off his frontal armor, and then his gunner will send the Sherman to its grave with a single shot. But this Sherman doesn't fire. Instead, it suddenly lurches backward, disappearing behind the ridge. The crew is abandoning their position. Weber orders his driver forward. When they crest the rise, they find the Sherman sitting motionless, tracks intact, gun elevated, empty. The Americans fled without taking a single shot. Weber climbs down from his Tiger and approaches the abandoned tank cautiously. He's seen plenty of British Crusaders and Matildas left on North African battlefields. This is different. The Sherman looks almost new, its hull name still painted clearly. War Daddy 2. Weber runs his hand along the cast hull, smooth, well-made, American. Within hours, Panzerabteilung 501's recovery crews have the Sherman running. It starts on the first try. They drive it 350 kilometers to Tunis over 4.5 days. It never breaks down, not once. Weber, riding in the commander's hatch for part of the journey, finds himself increasingly troubled. The seats are comfortable. The controls are smooth. Visibility is excellent. Everything about this tank speaks of careful engineering and mass production capability. At the port in Tunis, Wehrmacht engineers carefully load War Daddy 2 onto a transport ship bound for Germany. Stenciled orders mark the hull. Do not cannibalize. For Army Weapons Office, testing. This tank will not be pressed into immediate combat service. Its destination is Kummersdorf, 25 kilometers south of Berlin, home to the Wehrmacht's most important weapons testing facility. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Sherman arrives at Kummersdorf in spring 1943, assigned testing number Versuchsfahrzeug 259 and license plate WH058941117. Wehrmacht engineers swarm over it immediately, measuring every dimension, testing every system, comparing it to captured Soviet T-34s and Germany's own Panzer III and IV tanks. What they discover shocks them, not because the Sherman is superior, but because of what it represents. The gun is adequate but not exceptional. The armor is respectable but not outstanding. But the engineering? The engineering is something else entirely. This tank was designed not for battlefield dominance, but for something far more dangerous: mass production and reliability. Chief Engineer Hauptmann Klaus Müller oversees the initial evaluation. He's tested dozens of captured Allied tanks, Soviet T-34s, that arrived crude but effective. British Matildas with excellent armor but terrible ergonomics. French char bis that were mechanical nightmares. The Sherman is none of these things. It's competent in every area without excelling in any. And that, Müller realizes with growing dread, is the point. He writes in his preliminary report, "The M4 medium tank represents American industrial philosophy applied to armored warfare. Every component shows evidence of design for manufacture. Cast hull sections require less skilled labor than welded construction." The Continental Radial engine is an aircraft engine, adapted for ground use, leveraging existing production lines. Rubber block tracks simplify maintenance. The vertical volute spring suspension is unsophisticated but durable and easily repaired. Müller's report continues for 30 pages, and every page deepens Germany's problem. The Sherman isn't designed to outfight a Panther or Tiger. It's designed to be built by the tens of thousands, shipped across oceans, maintained by crews with minimal training, and replaced immediately when destroyed. The Americans aren't trying to build a supertank, they're building a good enough tank that they can produce faster than Germany can destroy them. In early June 1943, Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, arrives at Kummersdorf. At 38 years old, Speer has been tasked with the impossible, matching Allied industrial output while Germany's factories face chronic labor shortages and increasing Allied bombing. He needs to see what the Americans have created. Speer climbs into War Daddy 2's commander's hatch, settling into the seat. He adjusts the periscope, tests the turret traverse, examines the gun sight. Everything works smoothly. The crew compartment is spacious by German standards. Visibility is excellent. The controls are clearly labelled and logically arranged. Then Speer asks for the Sherman to be started. The Continental engine turns over immediately and settles into a steady rumble. He asks about maintenance intervals. The answer troubles him deeply. While German tanks require major overhauls every 400 to 500 miles, often needing complete transmission or engine replacements, the Sherman shows far less wear. The Americans have prioritized reliability over peak performance. But the real revelation comes during comparative tests. Engineers bring out a Panther, Germany's newest medium tank, recently deployed to the Eastern Front. On paper, the Panther is superior in every measurable way. Its 75mm long-barreled gun vastly outmatches the Sherman's shorter weapon. Its sloped armor is nearly impervious frontally. Its top speed exceeds the Sherman's. Then they conduct the hill climbing test. Engineers at Kummersdorf have built a steep earthen ramp specifically for testing mobility. The Sherman approaches first. Its Continental R975 engine, producing 375 horsepower for a tank weighing roughly 32 tons, gives it excellent power-to-weight ratio. The tank accelerates up the slope, tracks churning steadily, and reaches the top without hesitation. At 45 tons, with a 690 horsepower Maybach engine, it should theoretically perform even better. But as it starts climbing, the tank struggles. The narrow tracks sink into the soft earth. The transmission, already prone to problems, strains under the load. Halfway up the slope, the Panther stalls. Its driver attempts to restart, but the engine won't turn over. The cooling system has overheated. Speer watches this display and understands immediately what it means. In his memoirs, written decades later, he recalls the moment. Reports on the cross-country mobility of the Sherman have been very favourable. The Sherman climbs mountains our tank experts consider inaccessible to tanks. One great advantage is that the Sherman has a very powerful motor in proportion to its weight. But Speer's concern goes deeper than mobility. He orders a comprehensive comparison of production requirements. How many man-hours does it take to build a Sherman versus a Panther? How much raw material? How many different suppliers? The answers are devastating. A Sherman requires approximately 10,000 man-hours to produce. A Panther requires 55,000. The Sherman uses a single cast hull that can be produced in one piece. The Panther requires hundreds of carefully welded armor plates, each requiring skilled labor. Sherman tracks are interchangeable between variants. Panther tracks must be precisely manufactured and frequently replaced. The Americans have 90% commonality of parts between Sherman variants. German tanks share almost nothing between models. The engineers' reports pile up on Speer's desk. One stands out. The American tank reflects a doctrine of mass deployment rather than individual superiority. They accept losses as inevitable and design for rapid replacement. We seek to build invulnerable machines. They seek to build adequate machines in quantities we cannot match. Speer takes this information to a meeting at Posen Castle in October 1943, where he addresses top Nazi officials. He doesn't mention the Sherman specifically, but his message is clear. Germany is losing the production war. The Reich's industrial output, while impressive, cannot match the combined might of American, British, and Soviet manufacturing. The Sherman is merely the most visible symbol of this imbalance. In Italy, frontline reports confirm the Kummersdorf findings. Panzer crews who capture functional Shermans eagerly press them into service. The 26th Panzer Division reports, "The Sherman's cross-country mobility on level ground is definitely superior to that of our tanks." Tiger units in Italy begin using captured Shermans as recovery vehicles because they're more reliable than German equipment. They can tow broken-down Tigers back to repair depots without themselves breaking down. The Kummersdorf tests expand. Wehrmacht engineers put the Sherman through punishing endurance trials. They drive it thousands of kilometers over rough terrain. They test it in mud, sand, and snow. They run the engine continuously for days. They deliberately stress every system to find the breaking point. The breaking point is hard to find. The Sherman keeps running. Its suspension bounces back from impacts that would crack German leaf springs. Its engine tolerates incredible abuse. Its transmission, while not as sophisticated as German designs, proves remarkably durable. One test engineer writes in frustration, "The vehicle appears designed for operation by minimally trained crews under adverse conditions. It forgives errors that would disable our tanks." This is perhaps the most disturbing discovery. German tankers undergo extensive training. They're expected to maintain their vehicles meticulously, perform complex repairs, and understand the intricate systems of Panthers and Tigers. The Sherman requires none of this. An American crew with basic training can operate and maintain it effectively. This means the Americans can field more crews, faster, and sustain higher attrition rates. Hauptmann Müller compiles a comprehensive technical assessment. His report acknowledges the Sherman's weaknesses. The 75mm gun, while effective against Panzer IIIs and IVs, cannot penetrate a Panther frontally at any range. The armour, though well sloped on the glacis plate, is inadequate against German 88mm and long 75mm guns. The Sherman will not dominate German tanks in single combat. But Müller's conclusion is grim. The question is not whether our tanks can defeat the Sherman individually, but whether we can produce and maintain sufficient numbers to face the quantities the Americans will deploy. Current intelligence estimates American Sherman production at over 2,000 units monthly. Our entire Panther production is projected at 600 units monthly at peak capacity. We cannot win a war of attrition. The numbers haunt German planners. By mid-1943, American factories are producing Shermans at a rate Germany cannot hope to match. Chrysler's Detroit Arsenal tank plant alone produces 2 Shermans per hour during peak shifts. Ford, Fisher Body, Pacific Car and Foundry, Federal Machine and Welder Company, Pressed Steel Car Company all have Sherman production lines running. Americans have distributed production across the continent, making it nearly impossible for German bombers to significantly impact output, even if they could reach American shores. Meanwhile, Panther production is concentrated in a few factories, all vulnerable to Allied bombing. The MAN factory in Nuremberg, Daimler-Benz in Berlin-Marienfelde, MNH in Hanover. When Allied bombers strike these facilities, Panther production stops entirely. When a Sherman factory is damaged, production shifts to other facilities. The strategic implications cascade through Wehrmacht planning sessions. If the Americans can build 5 Shermans for every Panther Germany produces, and if each Panther requires 2 Shermans to destroy it, Germany still loses. But the math is even worse. Panthers break down frequently, requiring extensive maintenance. Shermans keep running. German crews, increasingly drawn from poorly trained replacements as experienced tankers die, struggle with complex Panther systems. American crews, with simpler equipment, maintain effectiveness. Speer attempts to implement lessons from the Sherman. He proposes simplified German tank designs, standardized components, distributed production. But Germany's industrial base cannot adapt quickly enough. Tooling exists for current designs. Factories are already strained to capacity. Raw materials, especially tungsten and manganese for armor steel, are increasingly scarce. The Romanian oil fields that fuel German armor are under constant threat. Every modification to improve production delays current output. By late 1943, Kummersdorf has tested multiple captured Shermans. Some arrive from North Africa, others from Italy, a few from the Eastern Front, where Americans have shipped thousands to the Soviets under Lend-Lease. Every test confirms the same pattern. The Sherman is a good enough tank, produced in unstoppable quantities. Wehrmacht intelligence analyzes American industrial capacity. The reports are sobering. The United States, protected by two oceans from strategic bombing, has converted its massive automotive industry to war production. The same factories that produced millions of civilian cars now produce tens of thousands of tanks, trucks, and armored vehicles. The same supply chains that distributed consumer goods now supply the largest military machine in history. One intelligence report notes, American tank production in 1943 will exceed 60,000 units of all types. Our total production for the year will be approximately 12,000 tanks and assault guns. Even accounting for quality differences, this numerical disparity is insurmountable. The Kummersdorf tests reveal another troubling detail. The Sherman has a gyrostabilized gun. It's not perfect, only functional while moving slowly, but it exists. Germany has experimented with gun stabilization for years but never deployed it. The Americans, newcomers to tank warfare, have incorporated technology that German engineers are still developing. This suggests their engineering establishment is larger and more capable than previously assessed. Examination of the Sherman's optics reveals another surprise. American gun sights and periscopes are of excellent quality, comparable to German Zeiss optics. The Americans have somehow matched Germany's precision optical industry, long considered the world's finest. How many Sherman periscopes can American factories produce? How many tanks can they equip? The answer arrives through captured documents. American production of tank periscopes runs to tens of thousands monthly. They're manufacturing optics at scales Germany cannot comprehend, let alone match. This isn't precision craftsmanship, it's precision mass production, a different philosophy entirely. Engineers at Kummersdorf disassemble War Daddy 2 completely, measuring and documenting every component. The cast hull sections show minimal porosity, indicating excellent foundry technique. The armor, though not the hardened steel Germany uses, proves more uniform in quality. American metallurgy may be less sophisticated, but it's more consistent. The Continental engine receives particular attention. It's an aircraft radial engine, originally designed for flying, adapted for ground use. This seems improvised, yet it works beautifully. The engine is simple to maintain, parts are widely available, and reliability is exceptional. Germany's purpose-built tank engines, designed specifically for armored vehicles, prove more temperamental. One revelation particularly troubles German engineers. The Sherman's electrical system uses 24 volts rather than Germany's 12-volt standard. This allows thinner, lighter wiring, while providing more power for the turret traverse motor and other electrical systems. It's a small detail, but it represents systematic thinking about every aspect of design. The Americans haven't just built a tank, they've built an integrated system optimized for production and maintenance. As 1943 progresses, more Shermans arrive at Kummersdorf. Engineers test cold weather performance, comparing Shermans to Panthers in simulated Eastern Front conditions. The Panthers' engine struggles to start in extreme cold. The Sherman, equipped with an engine primer system, starts reliably. German crews on the Eastern Front already know this from bitter experience. Russian winter has claimed more panzers to mechanical failure than enemy action. The Wehrmacht begins using captured Shermans in frontline service. Not because they're superior fighting vehicles, but because they're reliable. The 10th SS Panzer Division forms a unit of 10 Shermans. Other divisions incorporate captured American tanks into their formations. These Shermans, painted with German crosses, serve throughout 1944 and into 1945. The most telling use comes from Tiger units. These elite formations, equipped with Germany's most powerful tanks, prefer captured Shermans as recovery vehicles. Tigers break down frequently, weighing 70 tons with complex drivetrains prone to failure. German recovery vehicles often cannot tow Tigers long distances without themselves breaking down. Shermans can. They have the power, the reliability, and the endurance to haul damaged Tigers from the battlefield to repair depots. This represents a complete reversal of expectations. Germany's most elite units depend on captured American equipment to keep their supertanks operational. The symbolic implications are clear to anyone paying attention. German technological superiority, long a source of national pride, doesn't matter if the machines won't run. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By early 1944, Wehrmacht assessments of the Sherman reach high command. The conclusions are uniformly grim. Germany can build technically superior tanks, but cannot build them in sufficient numbers to matter. The Americans can build adequate tanks in numbers that will overwhelm any defense. The outcome of the armored war is no longer in doubt. Hitler, increasingly detached from reality, dismisses these reports. He demands heavier tanks, more powerful guns, thicker armor. The result is the Tiger II, King Tiger, 70 tons of magnificent engineering that requires 200,000 man-hours to build, breaks down constantly, and arrives in numbers too small to influence the war. German industry produces fewer than 500 King Tigers before the war ends. Meanwhile, American Sherman production exceeds 49,000 units by war's end. The British build thousands more, equipping their best tank regiments with Sherman Fireflies, mounting 17-pounder guns that can defeat any German armor. The Soviets receive over 4,000 Shermans through Lend-Lease and praise them for reliability superior to their T-34s. The Kummersdorf tests of War Daddy II in spring 1943 revealed a truth German leadership couldn't accept. The war would not be won by superior tanks or better-trained crews. It would be won by industrial capacity, logistical efficiency, and the ability to sustain losses while maintaining offensive pressure. The Sherman embodied this philosophy. It was good enough, and there were enough of them. As the war progressed, more sophisticated Shermans appeared. The 76mm gun version arrived in mid-1944, providing better anti-tank capability. The British 17-pounder Firefly could destroy Panthers and Tigers from the front. American tungsten core HVAP ammunition, when available, penetrated even heavy German armor. But the fundamental equation never changed. For every Sherman destroyed, 2 more arrived to replace it. German tankers learned this bitter lesson repeatedly. At Aracourt in September 1944, newly formed Panther brigades attacked American positions confidently. The Panthers were superior tanks with superior guns and superior armor. They lost catastrophically, destroyed by coordinated American tactics, artillery, air support, and yes, Sherman tanks that refused to fight fair, attacking from ambush at close range where even the 75mm gun could penetrate. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated German armoured power's final gasp. Impressive numbers of Panthers, Tigers, and King Tigers smashed into American lines, achieving initial surprise and success. But within days, American reinforcements arrived, bringing hundreds of Shermans. German tanks, already suffering mechanical breakdowns in brutal winter conditions, ran out of fuel as Allied aircraft destroyed supply columns. The offensive collapsed not from superior American tanks, but from superior American logistics. Engineers at Kummersdorf continued testing throughout 1944. They studied newer Sherman variants as they were captured. The 76mm version received particular attention. Its gun, while still inferior to German long 75s, represented a significant improvement. More concerning, reports indicated the Americans were producing these upgraded Shermans in vast numbers, transitioning production lines with remarkable speed. One captured Sherman variant particularly impressed German engineers. The M4A3E2, nicknamed Jumbo by Americans, mounted much thicker armor. Frontal protection approached Panther levels. Gun penetration tests showed the Jumbo could withstand German 75mm guns from moderate range. If the Americans could produce heavily armoured Shermans in quantity, even Germany's advantage in tank guns might vanish. But the Americans didn't need heavily armoured tanks. They had enough regular Shermans to simply overwhelm German positions through numerical superiority. The Jumbo remained a specialised assault variant, produced in limited numbers. Why complicate production when standard Shermans sufficed? This pragmatism characterised American tank doctrine. They accepted losses as inevitable. Crews knew the Sherman was vulnerable. They called it the Ronson Lighter, or Tommy Cooker, acknowledging its tendency to burn when penetrated. But the Americans understood what German planners refused to accept. Wars are won by forces that can sustain losses and continue fighting, not by forces that avoid losses through superior equipment. By early 1945, Kummersdorf faced a more immediate problem than testing captured equipment. The facility lay directly in the path of advancing Soviet armies. Engineers received orders to evacuate or destroy sensitive materials. Some captured vehicles were sent to frontline units for combat use. Others were simply abandoned. In the final days, a hastily formed Kampfgruppe Kummersdorf included 2 American Shermans among its defending forces. These tanks, captured years earlier for evaluation, now fought to defend the facility where they'd been tested. The irony was lost on no one. Germany's Weapons Testing Center, which had documented American industrial superiority, was now defended partly by American equipment. War Daddy 2's final fate remains uncertain. It may have been destroyed in the facility's defense, captured by Soviet forces, or scrapped. But its legacy endured in every Wehrmacht report that warned of American production capacity, in every assessment that predicted German defeat, in every analysis that showed technological superiority meant nothing against industrial might. The Kummersdorf tests revealed an uncomfortable truth. The Sherman wasn't a great tank. It was a good enough tank, produced in quantities that rendered German superiority irrelevant. Panther and Tiger crews might win individual engagements, but they lost the war. For every Panther produced, 10 Shermans rolled off American assembly lines. For every Tiger, 20. And while German tanks sat immobilized, waiting for parts that never came or fuel that couldn't be delivered, Shermans kept running. In post-war debriefs, surviving German engineers reflected on the lessons of the Sherman. They'd tested it, analyzed it, understood it completely. They'd recognized the threat it represented. But recognition wasn't enough. Germany lacked the industrial base, the resources, and ultimately the strategic position to counter American manufacturing might. The Sherman's strength wasn't in its armor or gun. Its strength was in the factories that built it and the logistics system that delivered it to battlefields around the world. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning of February 22nd, 1943. Near Spitler, Tunisia, the desert air shimmers with heat. First, Panzerabteilung 501, Tiger Battalion, rolls forward through the scrubland, hunting American armor. Lieutenant Hans Weber peers through his commander's cupola, scanning for targets. His Tiger's 88mm gun can destroy anything the Americans have fielded. He knows this. His crew knows this. Then he sees it. An M4A1 Sherman, hull down behind a ridge, its turret swiveling frantically. The American crew has spotted the Tiger. Weber knows what comes next. The Americans will fire, the shell will bounce harmlessly off his frontal armor, and then his gunner will send the Sherman to its grave with a single shot. But this Sherman doesn't fire. Instead, it suddenly lurches backward, disappearing behind the ridge. The crew is abandoning their position. Weber orders his driver forward. When they crest the rise, they find the Sherman sitting motionless, tracks intact, gun elevated, empty. The Americans fled without taking a single shot. Weber climbs down from his Tiger and approaches the abandoned tank cautiously. He's seen plenty of British Crusaders and Matildas left on North African battlefields. This is different. The Sherman looks almost new, its hull name still painted clearly. War Daddy 2. Weber runs his hand along the cast hull. Smooth, well-made, American. Within hours, Panzerabteilung 501's recovery crews have the Sherman running. It starts on the first try. They drive it 350 kilometers to Tunis over 4.5 days. It never breaks down, not once. Weber, riding in the commander's hatch for part of the journey, finds himself increasingly troubled. The seats are comfortable, the controls are smooth. Visibility is excellent. Everything about this tank speaks of careful engineering and mass production capability. At the port in Tunis, Wehrmacht engineers carefully load War Daddy 2 onto a transport ship bound for Germany. Stenciled orders mark the hull. Do not cannibalize. For Army Weapons Office, testing. This tank will not be pressed into immediate combat service. Its destination is Kummersdorf, 25 kilometers south of Berlin, home to the Wehrmacht's most important weapons testing facility. The Sherman arrives at Kummersdorf in spring 1943, assigned testing number Versuchsfahrzeug 259 and license plate WH05894117. Wehrmacht engineers swarm over it immediately, measuring every dimension, testing every system, comparing it to captured Soviet T-34s and Germany's own Panzer III and IV tanks. What they discover shocks them, not because the Sherman is superior, but because of what it represents. The gun is adequate but not exceptional. The armor is respectable but not outstanding. But the engineering? The engineering is something else entirely. This tank was designed not for battlefield dominance, but for something far more dangerous: mass production and reliability. Chief Engineer Hauptmann Klaus Müller oversees the initial evaluation. He's tested dozens of captured Allied tanks, Soviet T-34s that arrived crude but effective, British Matildas with excellent armor but terrible ergonomics, French Char bis that were mechanical nightmares. The Sherman is none of these things. It's competent in every area without excelling in any. And that, Müller realizes with growing dread, is the point. He writes in his preliminary report, "The M4 medium tank represents American industrial philosophy applied to armored warfare. Every component shows evidence of design for manufacture. Cast hull sections require less skilled labor than welded construction. The Continental Radial engine is an aircraft engine adapted for ground use, leveraging existing production lines. Rubber block tracks simplify maintenance. The vertical volute spring suspension is unsophisticated, but durable and easily repaired." Müller's report continues for 30 pages, and every page deepens Germany's problem. The Sherman isn't designed to outfight a Panther or Tiger. It's designed to be built by the tens of thousands, shipped across oceans, maintained by crews with minimal training, and replaced immediately when destroyed. The Americans aren't trying to build a super tank. They're building a good enough tank that they can produce faster than Germany can destroy them. In early June 1943, Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, arrives at Kummersdorf. At 38 years old, Speer has been tasked with the impossible, matching Allied industrial output while Germany's factories face chronic labor shortages and increasing Allied bombing. He needs to see what the Americans have created. Speer climbs into War Daddy 2's commander's hatch, settling into the seat. He adjusts the periscope, tests the turret traverse, examines the gun sight. Everything works smoothly. The crew compartment is spacious by German standards. Visibility is excellent. The controls are clearly labelled and logically arranged. Then Speer asks for the Sherman to be started. The Continental engine turns over immediately and settles into a steady rumble. He asks about maintenance intervals. The answer troubles him deeply. While German tanks require major overhauls every 400 to 500 miles, often needing complete transmission or engine replacements, the Sherman shows far less wear. The Americans have prioritized reliability over peak performance. But the real revelation comes during comparative tests. Engineers bring out a Panther, Germany's newest medium tank, recently deployed to the Eastern Front. On paper, the Panther is superior in every measurable way. Its 75mm long-barreled gun vastly outmatches the Sherman's shorter weapon. Its sloped armor is nearly impervious frontally. Its top speed exceeds the Sherman's. Then they conduct the hill climbing test. Engineers at Kummersdorf have built a steep earthen ramp specifically for testing mobility. The Sherman approaches first. Its Continental R975 engine, producing 375 horsepower for a tank weighing roughly 32 tons, gives it excellent power-to-weight ratio. The tank accelerates up the slope, tracks churning steadily, and reaches the top without hesitation. Now, the Panther. At 45 tons with a 690 horsepower Maybach engine, it should theoretically perform even better. But as it starts climbing, the tank struggles. The narrow tracks sink into the soft earth. The transmission, already prone to problems, strains under the load. Halfway up the slope, the Panther stalls. Its driver attempts to restart, but the engine won't turn over. The cooling system has overheated. Speer watches this display and understands immediately what it means. In his memoirs, written decades later, he recalls the moment. Reports on the cross-country mobility of the Sherman have been very favourable. The Sherman climbs mountains our tank experts consider inaccessible to tanks. One great advantage is that the Sherman has a very powerful motor in proportion to its weight. But Speer's concern goes deeper than mobility. He orders a comprehensive comparison of production requirements. How many man-hours does it take to build a Sherman versus a Panther? How much raw material? How many different suppliers? The answers are devastating. A Sherman requires approximately 10,000 man-hours to produce. A Panther requires 55,000. The Sherman uses a single cast hull that can be produced in one piece. The Panther requires hundreds of carefully welded armor plates, each requiring skilled labor. Sherman tracks are interchangeable between variants. Panther tracks must be precisely manufactured and frequently replaced. The Americans have 90% commonality of parts between Sherman variants. German tanks share almost nothing between models. Throughout summer and fall 1943, War Daddy 2 accumulates testing miles. Engineers drive it through mud, sand, and rough terrain. They run the engine continuously for days, monitoring for failures that never come. They fire the gun hundreds of times, checking for wear. The tank keeps running. Parts wear, certainly, but within acceptable tolerances. Nothing breaks catastrophically. Müller writes another report in September. This one is marked Most Secret and sent directly to Speer's office. The conclusions are stark. Germany cannot win an industrial war against America. The numbers don't lie. American tank production already exceeds German output by 3-1. That ratio will only grow as American factories reach full capacity, while German production suffers under Allied bombing. But the real danger, Müller warns, isn't current Sherman production. It's the American ability to adapt and improve. The Sherman's modular design allows upgrades without redesigning the entire vehicle. New guns can be mounted in existing turrets. Improved engines can replace older models. The Americans can evolve the Sherman faster than Germany can field entirely new tank designs. He's proven right within months. In November 1943, Kummersdorf receives intelligence reports of a new Sherman variant mounting a more powerful 76mm gun. The Americans have identified the weakness in their design and corrected it without stopping production. German tank development, by contrast, requires years from concept to battlefield deployment. Winter 1943 brings a grim milestone. Intelligence estimates American Sherman production has exceeded 25,000 units. Germany, by comparison, has built approximately 6,000 Panzer IVs, its primary medium tank, and fewer than 1,000 Panthers. The mathematics of attrition are inescapable. Germany cannot replace losses. America can. Speer returns to Kummersdorf in January 1944. He arrives, unannounced, wanting to see the testing program without ceremony or prepared presentations. He finds Müller in the maintenance bay, supervising teardown of War Daddy 2's transmission. The Sherman has accumulated over 5,000 kilometers in testing, the equivalent of sustained combat operations. The engineers lay out the transmission components on clean white sheets. Speer examines each part. Wear is visible but minimal. No catastrophic failures, no broken teeth on gears, no cracked housings. This transmission, designed for ease of manufacture, has outlasted German equivalents designed for theoretical perfection. Speer asks the question that's been troubling him since his first visit. Can we copy it? Müller hesitates before answering. Technically? Yes. Herr Minister, we could reproduce the Sherman exactly, but we cannot reproduce the industrial system that creates it. The Americans have purpose-built factories producing standardized components. They have trained their workforce for single tasks requiring minimal skill. They have logistics networks that deliver raw materials efficiently and ship finished tanks anywhere in the world. We have none of that infrastructure. What if we simplified our existing designs? Speer asks. Reduced the Panthers' complexity, standardized components across models. That would help, Müller admits. But we're too late. The Americans have a 2-year head start in industrial mobilization. While we pursued technical excellence, they pursued production efficiency. Now they have both superior numbers and continuously improving quality. Speer leaves Kummersdorf that evening with a heavy heart. He knows what the Sherman represents. Not just a tank, but an entire philosophy of warfare that Germany cannot counter. The Wehrmacht can still win battles through superior tactics and crew training. But wars aren't won by battles. They're won by sustained pressure, by replacing losses, by maintaining offensive momentum, until the enemy collapses. The Sherman embodies that strategy. Through spring 1944, War Daddy 2 continues accumulating testing data. But the testing program's purpose has shifted. Engineers no longer seek weaknesses to exploit. They document American capabilities to inform German strategic planning. Every report concludes the same way. Germany must seek negotiated peace before American material superiority becomes overwhelming. Hitler refuses to hear these assessments. When Speer presents Müller's reports at a military conference in March 1944, Hitler dismisses them as defeatist. He demands heavier tanks, more powerful guns. The result is the Tiger II program, which diverts resources from more practical designs. Germany will build fewer than 500 King Tigers before war's end. America will build over 20,000 more Shermans in the same period. In June 1944, news reaches Kummersdorf of the Normandy landings. Intelligence estimates suggest thousands of Allied tanks have come ashore, the majority being Shermans. Wehrmacht units report being overwhelmed not by superior equipment but by sheer numbers. For every German tank, 5 or 6 Shermans. For every German victory, 2 more American tanks appear to replace losses. Müller reads these reports with grim satisfaction. He'd predicted this outcome 18 months earlier, sitting in War Daddy 2's commander's seat, recognizing what it represented. The Americans had solved the fundamental problem of mechanized warfare, how to keep tanks running under combat conditions while replacing losses faster than the enemy can inflict them. By autumn 1944, testing at Kummersdorf becomes sporadic. Allied bombing targets German fuel production. There's barely enough gasoline to run essential operations, let alone testing programs. War Daddy 2 sits in its bay, preserved but inactive, a monument to American industrial might. December brings the Ardennes. Offensive. Germany's final major attack. Panthers and Tigers smash into American lines, achieving initial success. But within days, the offensive stalls. Not from superior American tanks, but from lack of fuel. German armor sits immobilized, while Allied aircraft destroy supply columns. American Shermans, benefiting from uninterrupted logistics, counterattack with overwhelming force. Müller follows reports of the Bulge with professional interest. This is the Sherman's final vindication. Not superior in combat, but superior in sustainability. The Americans can afford to lose tanks because more arrive constantly. Germans cannot. Every loss is irreplaceable. January 1945 brings Soviet offensives driving toward Berlin. Kummersdorf lies directly in their path. Orders arrive to evacuate or destroy sensitive equipment. Müller faces a decision about War Daddy 2. Send it to frontline units? destroy it to prevent capture, or leave it for advancing Soviets. He chooses none of these options. Instead, Müller orders the Sherman prepared for one final test. They'll drive it under combat conditions, see how it performs when everything else is falling apart. A small crew is assembled. Young soldiers, barely trained, who've never operated a tank before. Perfect test subjects for the Sherman's design philosophy. They start the engine. It turns over smoothly despite months of idleness and inadequate maintenance. The crew figures out the controls quickly. The Sherman's ergonomic design makes learning simple. Within an hour, they're driving competently. Within 2 hours, they're conducting basic tactical maneuvers. This, Müller realizes, is the Sherman's ultimate achievement. It's so straightforward that green crews can operate it effectively, almost immediately. German tanks require months of training to master. The Sherman requires days. Soviet forces reach Kummersdorf on January 28, 1945. They find the facility mostly evacuated. Some equipment remains, including War Daddy 2. The Soviet commander, familiar with Lend-Lease Sherman's his force's use, recognizes the tank immediately. He orders it preserved and sent to Moscow for examination. And so War Daddy 2 completes its circle. Captured by Germans in Tunisia, tested at Kummersdorf, and finally recaptured by Soviets driving toward Berlin. The tank itself survives the war, though its ultimate fate remains uncertain. Some reports suggest it was scrapped in the late 1940s. Others claim it ended up in a Soviet training facility where it served for years before finally being retired. But War Daddy 2's legacy isn't its physical survival, it's the lessons it taught. German engineers who tested it understood, years before the war's end, that Germany had lost. Not because German tanks were inferior, but because the industrial war was unwinnable. The Sherman proved that adequacy produced in quantity defeats excellence produced in scarcity. Klaus Müller survives the war. In 1946, American interrogators find him in Bavaria, working as a mechanic. They're interested in his knowledge of German tank development. During weeks of debriefing, Müller provides detailed information about Panther and Tiger programs. But the Americans are most interested in his assessments of the Sherman. What did German engineers really think? Was it as bad as some American tankers claimed? Müller's answer surprises them. The Sherman wasn't the problem, he explains. The Sherman was the solution to a problem we failed to solve. You understood that wars are won by industrial systems, not individual weapons. You built a tank that your economy could produce, your logistics could supply, your crews could maintain, and your doctrine could employ effectively. We built technical marvels that required perfection at every level. When perfection proved impossible under war conditions, our entire system collapsed. He pauses, then adds, the Sherman was a good enough tank, and good enough produced in quantity will always defeat excellent produced in scarcity. That's the lesson of War Daddy 2. We learned it too late. Years later, in 1967, Müller is invited to speak at a military history conference in Munich. The topic is tank development during the Second World War. Most speakers focus on technical specifications and famous battles. Müller takes a different approach. He begins by describing that morning in 1943 when War Daddy 2 arrived at Kummersdorf. He talks about the tests, the comparisons, the growing recognition of what it represented. Then he shares the reports he sent to Speer, the warnings that went unheeded, the mathematical inevitability of defeat when industrial capacity determines outcomes. The audience, many former Wehrmacht officers, listens in uncomfortable silence. They remember being told their equipment was superior, their training better, their tactics unbeatable. Müller is explaining why they lost anyway. The Sherman, he concludes, taught us that superiority isn't about performance specifications. It's about the entire system: design, production, logistics, maintenance, training, doctrine. The Americans understood this. We didn't. That's why they won. After the speech, a young American military attaché approaches Müller. He introduces himself as the son of a Sherman tank commander who fought in Europe. His father's tank was named War Daddy. Not War Daddy 2, but the name is close enough to be meaningful. My father always said the Sherman wasn't the best tank, the attaché explains. But it was the right tank. He said it kept him alive because when his Sherman was destroyed, another one arrived the next day. German tanks were better, but there weren't enough of them. Müller nods slowly. Your father understood something many generals never grasped. Survival in war isn't about having the best weapon, it's about having enough weapons to sustain losses and continue fighting. The Sherman gave your father that. Our tanks couldn't give the same to our crews. The conversation continues for an hour. Two men from opposite sides of a long-ended war, discussing the lessons of a single captured tank that revealed the war's inevitable outcome. Eventually, the attaché asks the question he's been building toward. Did you ever regret it, testing the Sherman so thoroughly? If your reports had been less accurate, maybe German leadership wouldn't have known how bad things were. Müller considers this carefully before responding. Knowledge didn't lose the war. We lost the war before War Daddy 2 arrived at Kummersdorf. We lost it when we chose technical excellence over production efficiency, when we prioritized individual tank performance over sustainable industrial output. My reports simply documented a reality that already existed. He pauses, looking out the window at Munich's rebuilt streets. But no, I don't regret it. Engineers serve truth. The Sherman was truth embodied in cast steel and rivets. It told us that modern warfare is won by economies, not armies. We needed to hear that truth, even though we couldn't act on it. The attaché thanks him and leaves. Müller remains at the window, watching the city's evening traffic. Somewhere out there are thousands of Germans driving Volkswagens, another product of mass production philosophy. The lesson of the Sherman has been learned, even if it came too late for war. Klaus Müller dies in 1979, age 73. His obituary in technical journals mentions his work on German tank development, but misses the deeper story. He was the man who tested War Daddy 2, who recognized what it represented, who wrote reports predicting German defeat based on industrial mathematics. History remembers the tanks. It forgets the engineers who understood what the tanks meant. But Müller's reports survive in military archives. Researchers studying the Wehrmacht's declining fortunes find them invaluable. They show that German engineers understood their situation clearly. The problem wasn't knowledge. It was the inability to act on that knowledge within Germany's industrial and political constraints. The Sherman itself endures in different ways. Museum examples worldwide preserve the tank's legacy. Veterans' reunions still feature former Sherman crews, sharing stories of battles fought and survived. Military historians continue debating its effectiveness, comparing it to German armor, analyzing its strengths and weaknesses. But the ultimate measure of the Sherman isn't found in technical specifications or kill ratios. It's found in the simple fact that it appeared on battlefields worldwide in numbers sufficient to achieve Allied victory. From North Africa to France, from Italy to the Pacific, Sherman served wherever American and Allied forces fought, not because it was the best tank, but because it was the right tank for the war being fought. War Daddy 2, the specific Sherman captured in Tunisia and tested at Kummersdorf, represents this larger truth. One tank among tens of thousands, distinguished only by the accident of capture, yet revealing the fundamental dynamics of industrial warfare. German engineers studied it intensively and learned that technical superiority meant nothing against numerical superiority backed by sustainable production. In the end, the lesson of War Daddy 2 isn't about tanks. It's about understanding how wars are won in the industrial age. Not by building the best weapons, but by building good enough weapons in quantities that allow sustained operations despite losses. Not by pursuing perfection, but by achieving adequacy at scale. Not by technical excellence, but by industrial efficiency. The Americans understood this. They built the Sherman accordingly. And they won the war. That's the story of War Daddy 2. A single tank that travelled from a Tunisian battlefield to a deep German testing facility, where it revealed truths about warfare that shaped military thinking for decades to come. The engineers at Kummersdorf saw the future in that Sherman's simple, reliable construction. They documented it thoroughly in reports that predicted German defeat. The tragedy wasn't that they were wrong. The tragedy was that they were right, and no one with power to change Germany's course was willing to listen. But history listened. The lessons learned from that captured Sherman influenced post-war tank design worldwide. Reliability became as important as firepower. Ease of maintenance mattered as much as armor protection. Production efficiency equaled tactical performance in strategic importance. The Sherman's philosophy, revealed through intensive testing at Kummersdorf, shaped how nations approached armored warfare for generations. And, somewhere, in the vast territories of the former Soviet Union, or perhaps melted down and repurposed decades ago, the physical remains of War Daddy II may still exist. The tank that crossed an ocean, survived testing by enemies, and taught lessons that outlived the war itself. A Sherman among Shermans, remembered not for what it destroyed, but for what it revealed about the nature of modern warfare. That revelation, delivered in cast steel and tested exhaustively on German proving grounds, remains relevant today. Wars are still won by economies. Sustainability still matters more than peak performance. Good enough at scale still defeats excellent in scarcity. The engineers at Kummersdorf understood this in 1943. The world learned it by 1945. And War Daddy II, a single Sherman tank with a painted name and a German test designation, stands as the enduring symbol of that hard-won knowledge.